Hello, BookTube. I was notified by email the other day that the Boston Public Library was going to have its book sale, which I have indoors in one of the big spaces inside the main library. Uh, the announcement was interesting because there have been a few months where the library didn't have its book sale because they were worried about COVID. And this time around, they were not worried. And said that they weren't even going to police the maximum occupancy for the room. People can come in any number that they want. And they gave the time and they gave the room, and I briefly thought about it and actually dismissed the idea of going. Because the last few times that I've been to the Boston Public Library book sale has been absolutely infested with those book dealers that you might have seen at your own library sales, that have the little app on their phone and they're busily scanning every ISBN, and they're really brusque and really rude and really just tone deaf to everyone around them who's beaming them laser beams of pure hatred. And they're often territorial. They will hog shelves of books. They make the experience just awful. They radiate the contempt they have for people who are reading these things, these weird objects of paper and glue, instead of selling them for 2 pennies profit on eBay. They radiate that contempt. They snicker. Sometimes they show up in pairs, although that's rare because they hate each other, too. They're competitors with each other. I once overheard a conversation where one dealer was talking to another and said that the third dealer that they knew in common was really sick at home, couldn't even get out of bed. And the person who gave the dealer that information said, "Do you want me to pass along, your best wishes?" And the person they were telling, without missing a beat and without being ironic, he wasn't joking, said, "Well, not to a competitor, no." They just stared at him and maybe gave a little nervous laugh. I stared at him too, and he noticed because what he was saying was, "Well, if someone can die and spare me an extra competitor at making that 2 pennies on eBay, then I'd be okay with them dying." Just hollowed out, shameful examples of what looks like human beings. And they infested the Boston Public Library book sale to the point where the old manager of the Friends of the Boston Public Library used to be a friend of mine, and I used to say to him over and over again, "It would be easy for you to stop this. Just tell people they can't use their cell phones in this room. Even collect the cell phones beforehand, put them all in a bucket before you enter the room. These dealer scum that all of us hate, you've been told about them many times, and not just by me. They don't know anything about books. They are totally dependent on that app, totally dependent on it. So if you show them a big floor-to-ceiling bookcase full of books and say, you can't use your app, and I want you to pick out the 5 books here that you have the highest likelihood of reselling for a profit," they wouldn't have the first idea, not the first idea of what to do. I've often said this over the years. For years, I said it to the young people at the Brattle Bookshop, who are trained by the greatest book value assessor in the country. I often used to joke to them that you carrying in your head the ability to do what these people can only do with a cell phone device, with a cell phone app. I say the same thing to book collectors here on BookTube. That your knowledge, which cannot be taken away from you and cannot be told you can't bring it into the room, would enable you to do a better job than these creatures can. If they didn't have their cell phones, they wouldn't be interested in any way. If they knew that was the rule, they wouldn't show up. There would be none of them. But that isn't the rule. So the last few times, honestly, my experience was kind of ruined by them there in such numbers, in such huge numbers. So I kind of told myself, well, I won't go to the book sale. I've been complaining all week about how many books I have. I won't go. That's all. It'd be nice to see familiar faces. It'd be certainly nice to be back in the Boston Public Library, but I just won't bother. And I sought counsel from my spiritual advisor in this regard. I was talking to my spiritual advisor about the anger that comes over me at the Boston Public Library book sale, and whether or not I could have his papal dispensation to kill somebody, to kill one of those dealers if they get really obnoxious. I don't know if you ever noticed this, how easy it is to get a dispensation for killing someone from an Irishman. If I'd said, "Well, Father Confessor, can I steal books from the Boston Public Library book sale?" Can I go with a bag and just covertly steal books? He just said, oh, the very thought. 5 Hail Marys and 10 Our Fathers for even suggesting it. If I said, okay, all right, fine. But if someone brings an unruly child, can I smack the child? He'd say, oh, smack a child? That's the devil in you speaking, you poor child. No, you may not smack a child. But if I were to say to that same person, well, okay, but if there's a dealer with one of those cell phone apps, can I kill him in cold blood? That same father confessor figure would say, oh, sure you can. What's that you say? So you're saying I can kill a book dealer just because he's annoying me? I'm sure you can. Haven't you suffered enough? Maybe I'm just picking the wrong spiritual advisors. I went anyway. I told myself I wouldn't, but I did. I went anyway. And I have to say, it was painless. It wasn't hugely crowded. It wasn't overheated. And I only noticed a couple of dealers. And they were being discreet. They were minding their business. They weren't pushing people aside. They weren't commandeering whole corners. I've seen them try that. I was at one of these sales once, and one of them said, yeah, that shelf there I'm working on. I said, I don't give a crap in a pan what you're working on. But who knows how many people heard that and thought, oh, maybe the library, he must be doing this with their permission. So I guess I'll leave that alone, even though I came here to buy books. They didn't act that way today. So I went to the Boston Public Library book sale, which is a thrill on its own. I didn't have any young friends with me. I didn't have any Sherpas, which is what the checkout people have long since called the young people that I bring with me to tote and bale all the stuff that I was carrying. And I also, in my own defense, out of pride, I have to mention that I did not do what I have done at the Boston Public Library many, many times, which is I plunk all my books down on the table. They're always very friendly, so I'm saying hi, they're saying hi. They're looking at the books. I'm saying, yeah, I'm happy to have found this and whatnot. And are you the table that takes debit cards? And am I going to have to sign something with my finger and whatnot? And while they're bagging up the books, we're having this cheery conversation. And then I grab the handles of the bag and say, well, this was just fantastic. Can't wait for the next sale. And I walk off and then remember I didn't pay. So I'm happy to say that did not happen today. And I found a bunch of books that I want to show you. Now, there was a theme. Very much there was a theme this time around. And I don't fight themes, whether it's at the Brattle Bookshop or anywhere else. I don't fight themes. If there's a theme going, I don't say, oh, well, I'm not interested in that today. I want something else. That's a good way to get the gods against you. So I didn't do that. So I have 2 books to show you that are big, fat, deckle-edged works of history and biography. You would think, if it's a library book sale with everything set off by sections, that's the only thing I would have to show you. But there was a theme going on. So I only have 2. One we have seen on this channel a couple of times. Every time I show this book, somebody's eyes light up and they ask me to send it to them. This is a battered library copy, so I don't think anybody's going to want this one. But this is Willard Stern Randall, and this is his big, great biography of Ethan Allen. Just a fantastic book with the library dust jacket. This is a D-Access library copy from somewhere, not the Boston Public Library, because they still have their copies on the shelf, but somewhere, someone donated this. And this is a terrific biography of the great young hero of Vermont in the American Revolution. It's a great book. It's full of granular detail. Obviously, the author was going for definitive. He wanted a life that could not be beat, and it's true. He wrote it. Not only is it really good, but he gathered more original documentation than anyone ever had on Ethan Allen, or than anyone ever will. In other words, the finest accolade that you can give to a work of biography, which is to say, no one in the future writing a biography of Ethan Allen will be able to avoid this book. They will, if they don't have this book, if they haven't heavily leaned on it, their book will be bad. I love it, and I'm due for a reread, but I didn't have a copy because I give it away all the time. And then this next one I also gave away, but it wasn't to one of you. It was to a grabby author, an author friend who came over to do an interview on this channel. When the interview was done, I said, I'm feeling a little self-conscious that not only did I lug you all the way out here, but that I'm not paying you anything. Feel free to take any books that you want. And the bastard, he zeroed in on a book right away. So I want this one, and took it. And I smiled, and he smiled, and I've been missing it ever since. And it's this. It's The British Are Coming. This is volume 1 in Rick Atkinson's new trilogy about the American Revolution. So Ethan Allen will feature prominently in this first volume. It's terrific. I don't know how many of you have read the Liberation trilogy by Rick Atkinson about the American Army in World War II, but he's an amazingly good writer. And I was thrilled to death when I learned that his new project, his new trilogy, was going to be on the American Revolution. And I loved this book. Absolutely loved it. I had a hardcover from the publisher sitting here on the shelf when it got grabbed. It got snatched, and I couldn't do anything about it. I'd already made the offer. I got a trade paperback from the publisher when it came out, but trade paperbacks they're really for Protestants, aren't they? So I was waiting. I've been waiting to see a hardcover, and I saw one today for a library sale price. So I grabbed it. And I am not going to go on at this point with 15 more works of biography and history, because that wasn't the theme. I spotted the theme as soon as I got there. Instantly I noticed what half the tables had. And the theme was science fiction and fantasy. Vintage science fiction and fantasy. In other words, science fiction and fantasy mass market paperbacks, which aren't made anymore. So there's a limited supply out there in the wild that is going to decrease just by simple logic. It is going to decrease every year until finally they're hard to find. There were tons of them. Table after table after table of mass market science fiction and fantasy mass market paperbacks. So I grabbed a ton of them. I want to show them to you. I got, for instance, this battered old original mass market paperback of Swords Point by Ellen Kushner. This is this is thinking person's epic fantasy. It's not in the best of shape. I am sure that the Brattle will provide a clean, perfect copy. Probably a hardcover with a dust jacket, but I don't have this at all, and I really, really wanted it. I've been wanting to reread this. Just high fantasy with nobles and cut purses and a striving pair of heroes. Just a delightful thing. It came out in the 80s. I read it then and loved it. I've read it periodically since then. But I found this. These were all, this was a library book sale, so these weren't expensive. Then this next one is by Karen Lawachi. I don't know this author very well. I read her first book, War Child, and kind of liked it. And then I read the sequel, Burn Dive, and loved it. I think the sequel is so much better than the original, than War Child. Probably because, at least for me, I don't particularly like reading, no offense to you or you Ender's Game fans, I don't particularly like science fiction where a child is the hero, which is going to come up a couple of times in this library hall. And here, the main character is older. He's a teenager. So, it's a little more believable, and the stakes are a little bit more entertaining. I remember really liking this. It's very densely done, world building. So the first two are books that I haven't read in a long time. When did Burn Dive came out? I'm going to say the late 90s, 2003. So it's been a while. That's been 10 years or 20 years. So, but then almost everything else in this pile here are not only doubles, but things that I know extremely well. I got them anyway, just because they were dirt cheap, and it never hurts to have perfect condition copies, or even battered copies. Although these are also perfect in case down the line somebody says, hey, I'd really like that. If it's a mass market if I only have it in a mass market paperback, and I know that mass market paperbacks are getting rarer and rarer to find of a vintage variety, I'm not going to want to give it to them. Right? Whereas if I have a double, well, then I will. So, for instance, we have this thing, which we've seen many times on this channel. This is in better condition than any copy of this book that I have. This is The Fate of the Phoenix by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreth. It's a very early Star Trek novel that is the sequel to their book, The Price of the Phoenix, in which a renegade scientist develops a technological means to completely duplicate someone, not just their body, but their soul, to make two people out of one person. But they're identical in every way, indistinguishable from each other. And we get a core cast of characters. We get Spock and Kirk and a duplicate made of Kirk, and we get the female Romulan commander from the Enterprise incident. A couple of other secondary characters, but oh my. And the villain, of course, Omni, who's amazing, and who here runs afoul of his own device. This is a great plot line that's coming. This is almost twice as long as The Price of the Phoenix, and it was a sequel that I was holding my breath for. So I was very happy when it appeared. Then I found a lot of one particular author. This is Julian May, who did a Pliocene exile tetralogy of books. This is the first one, The Many-Colored Land. I found them all. I found The Many-Colored Land. I found The Golden Torque. Then The Non-Born King. There's Aiken Drum with the raised middle finger on his shirt. And finally, The Adversary, my favorite book in the series, the fourth one, The Adversary. There's all of our cast on the bottom there, this classic Michael Whelan cover. There's all the cast members that we've come to know so well. And these are a science fiction series from the 80s. Let's find out when The Many-Colored Land came out. I'm going to say the mid-80s. 1981. And the premise is that in the future of Earth, when humanity has been welcomed into an intergalactic federation, they are a member in good standing of an intergalactic federation, so all of their material wants are taken care of. Earth is a paradise. And in that world, a time portal is discovered. A little bubble, a little warp, a little hole in the fabric of space-time is discovered in a valley in France that leads to the Pliocene epoch on Earth, millions of years ago. So rudimentary Ramapithecines that will eventually give rise to the whole of humanity. Huge, gigantic animals, the dinosaurs are long gone, but there are gigantic mammals of all kinds everywhere. And the scientist who discovers the portal realizes that it opens in the exact same area of France, only in the Pliocene era, and that it's a one-way trip. You can go through it into the Pliocene, but nothing comes back. If you try to get something back, it ages those intervening years, and so it shows up as powder. The only reason that he's able to test it is by using crystals and things that don't age, or that effectively aren't going to fall to powder when they come back. And despite that limitation, it starts to have an appeal to certain bored or disillusioned members of this century, of this paradise Earth. Some members of that world, they've joined this intergalactic federation. They have achieved higher operant metaphysical powers like telekinesis or super fast healing or telepathy. Some members of that society, the misfits of that society, don't really want to live there anymore. They're perfectly happy to take a one-way trip to an admittedly dangerous period in Earth's history, but still the atmosphere is breathable, the sunlight is the same, and there's no civilization of any kind. It's the ultimate getaway, the ultimate roughing trip, whether you come back or not. And a core cast of characters goes to this valley and decides to take that trip. What are you doing? What are you doing? And it's only when they go through the portal that they realize that aliens crash landed on Earth in the Pliocene and have been systematically capturing every human that comes through the portal. There's no way for anybody to know. There's no way for any message to get back to the 24th century, so nobody knows this. there's a group of aliens who are taking advantage of every newcomer that comes through the gate. And it turns out that our core cast of characters in the first 3 books here is sufficiently powerful and diverse to throw a monkey wrench into that long-established plan. And the books just unfold that. It's just terrific. Culminating in The Adversary, where we get the full story of the fact that these people weren't the first people to go through that portal. And that some of the people who went through that portal a decade ago went through heavily armed and had all sorts of ideas of their own. Just a big, sprawling story that I love. It's full of individual adventure. It's full of high court politics from these sophisticated aliens and their alien enemies that they also brought to Earth. Just terrific stuff. And it was popular. Fans responded to it, and it opens the doorway to other stories, right? And a number of fans approached Julian May, and Julian May already had the story, to tell the story of mankind joining this intergalactic federation. How did that happen? How did humanity suddenly become embraced and get these hyper-operant metaphysical mental powers? And Julian May decided to tell that story in a book called Intervention. That is terrific. I think it's the best thing she ever wrote. Starts off in a working class mill town in New Hampshire. No aliens in sight. No, nothing like that. It's normal working class families who, unbeknownst to them, are experiencing the heightened psychic powers that will eventually bring them to the attention of the alien races that are monitoring Earth for potential admission to this group. And Intervention came out as a hardcover, and then when it was issued in paperback, Del Rey split it in two. And I found both of those. Book 1 and Book 2. Book 1 is Surveillance. Book 2 is Metaconcert. Metaconcert is when all of the operant humans who meld their mental powers together, and that is a sign to the watching aliens that Earth is ready. That Earth is ready to join this large group of aliens. I read this story originally in these mass market paperbacks, so I was happy to find them again. I have since, I have an ebook of Intervention, and I just reread it at the beginning of this year and loved it, just loved it. But I'm glad to have these in mass market paperbacks, especially since somebody took very good care of these things. These things, when did Intervention come out? 1987, so that's a long time. For it to be in pretty good shape. Then the next one is the first book in a series that I've also praised on this channel many, many times. That's what I did. I grabbed these things, as I saw them. And this is Caverns by Kevin O'Donnell. This is book 1 in the Journeys of McGill Fayen, this is slightly in the future. In fact, I think this is so slightly in the future that it may have already happened. I wonder if they give us a date. Well, no, but this has, air cars and whatnot and aliens visiting Earth and whatnot, but it's still recognizably Earth. And there is a group of people in this future world, again, a concilium of interplanetary societies. There's a group of people called flingers. They are mutants. They have an inborn ability to sit in one place and teleport one object to someplace else. They have a limit. All flingers have the same limit. They have a weight limit past which it just won't work. They can try to fling something and it won't go anywhere. But it's well known, and by this point they're a guild, a very powerful guild. They obviously make a huge amount of interstellar civilization possible and easy. And McGill, young McGill, is a flinger. And we get his coming of age and his raucous admission into the ranks of the flingers and his adventures. Because it turns out in the course of this went on for 4 books. And I always wanted Kevin O'Donnell to do more. I think one of you told me that he's dead, so he won't be doing any more. But in the course, it becomes quickly obvious that the society, Earth society, and also the Flinger Guild have been infiltrated by a horrible, evil entity who uses a catspaw named Milford Humrummy. And that horrible, evil entity is the age-old adversary of the far-being Retzglaren, who may or may not be God, and who has an interest in McGill fans. So this is just dense and funny and wonderful. Just wonderful. So, I didn't see any other volumes. I just saw volume 1. And I have a couple of other copies of volume 1, but I'm happy to find another one. Absolutely happy. Then we have a battered mass market paperback of James Hogan. James Hogan is a science fiction author who was also a scientist. I don't know if he's still alive. He writes fairly stodgy fiction, as most scientists domesticated into the genre of science fiction do. But a lot of his books are very interesting. The Gentle Giants of Ganymede is very interesting. I have seldom been just flat out disappointed by a James Hogan book. I don't think he's in print anymore. Pretty sure he isn't writing anymore if he's alive. But once upon a time, again, I think back in the 80s. Let's see here. 1980, the year 1980. So, good Lord, 42 years ago. Oh my God. He wrote a book called Thrice Upon a Time. Again, that at the heart of the story is a kind of investigation of time travel. In a very technical sense, in the kind of technical sense you would expect a physicist to do. But there's a lot of other things involved too, including skullduggery in an old castle. It has a very interesting Rowena cover. Unfortunately, the cover has seen better days on this edition. A very interesting Rowena cover. I don't know what attracts me to it. Maybe the cat. And you notice you've got what Rowena meant as a huge juxtaposition on the cover is that you have the ancient stonework and the ancient suit of armor, and on the table is supposed to be what in this cover illustration in 1980, the juxtaposition was supposed to be that in the midst of all of this ancient stuff, you have something incredibly cutting edge. And I myself remember I was working in a newsroom when we got computers that looked just like that. They were huge. They weighed 500 pounds apiece. We had to reinforce the tables before we could bring them in. And they had the huge metal housing and the black screen with a black background and luminous green letters in stacks. They looked almost exactly like that. But that is nevertheless the contrast that Rowena is going for here, the ultra-modern versus the ultra-ancient. The irony being, of course, that if you showed this book to a kid today in 2022, they would say that it all looks like ancient history. Some of them, since they aren't taught history anymore in school, some of them might wonder, did Richard the Lionheart actually have computers that looked that old? You would have to slowly, patiently tell them that computers weren't invented in Richard the Lionheart's day, that Eleanor of Aquitaine and Napoleon Bonaparte didn't have the internet. You'd have to slowly tell them that. But I don't think I have more than one other copy of this, so I grabbed it. These were all, keep in mind, incredibly cheap. Then I found a couple more books by an author that I really love. I found the author's R.A. McAvoy, and I found Damiano, the first book in a series of books, a trilogy, I believe. They're fantasy novels set in the Italian Renaissance. So wizardry exists, and our main character talks with his dog, Macchiata, and he also talks with an angel. He talks with the Archangel Raphael. And he is the son of a wizard who's, ambivalently looked upon by the citizens of his little Italian town. But he's also stalked by the devil, and so is everyone else. And there are scenes in here that are unbelievably good. Just unbelievably good. As young Damiano learns not only the ways of the magic that is his birthright, but also the responsibilities. What happens if you do it thoughtlessly? It's just fantastic. I don't think that I saw the other two volumes in this. The next one is Damiano's Lute, and then Raphael, and I don't think that I saw them. But I'm happy to have the first one anyway, even though I have these as ebooks. The same thing with this next one, which I do not have as an ebook. I don't know who does this cover. Kind of wish I did. But this is not part of the Damiano series. This is a science fiction novel called The Third Eagle, which takes place in an alien world. Our main character is a young man named Wambly, who has he's sort of a space Native American, a space Lakota, that sort of thing. And he has an oppressive boss, and the oppressive boss is part of a ring of oppressive bosses, and he's eventually going to bring them all down. It's not anything like Damiano. It's not anything like Tea with the Black Dragon, but it is a very good science fiction story. Then next we have two copies of a series that is out of print that I love. I've praised it on this channel many times. I wasn't going to pass it up, because the days when I'm going to see these mass markets, especially for 25 cents each, are numbered. They are almost over. This is by Kirk Mitchell, and the first book is Procurator. There you have a Roman barge, basically a Roman trireme, only it's mechanized, and it's run by gasoline, and it's in the high snowy regions of some Roman province. It's not on the water with Mark Antony lounging on the deck, and it's got gun turrets. And the reason for that is because this is an alternate history in which Rome never fell. So Rome is still around and fighting so-called barbarians centuries, millennia after Julius Caesar. And this story deals with a very good man in the ranks of the Roman bureaucracy who insists on he is not corrupt and he is not debauched with power the way so much of the Rome of his day is. He is not like that. And you get the sense when you're reading this, you're not 50 pages in before you're thinking, well, wouldn't it be great if he ended up as emperor? And this was also popular with fans. So Kirk Mitchell wrote a couple of sequels. And one of them was this, Cry Republic. Look at the shape that this is in. No one's ever touched it. Unlike Procurator, someone read this. No one's ever read this. And I haven't reread it in forever. This came out in 1989. This was, I think, the third book. The New Barbarians was the second one. Or maybe The New Barbarians was the third one. The New Barbarians was not at the library. I would have grabbed all three if it were. But this is just more the further adventures of our main character and this world, the fleshing out of this world, because Kirk Mitchell takes us all over the world. So, South America, that sort of thing. Very interesting stuff. Then this is a rare instance where, like the Julian May, I saw all these books and grabbed them all because I'm never going to see them all again, and they are fascinating. The first one of these is by Robert Stallman, and this is The Orphan. And this is one of the strangest, this also has a child protagonist, but not really. And this is one of the strangest, most convincing werewolf novels I've ever read in a science fiction novel. This is not a horror novel, but it's incredibly good. It's incredibly thoughtful, poetic in its phrasing. And again, it caught on. And so there were other books that moved into the Timescape label. And these books came out in, I've read The Orphan many times. But these others came out in the 1980s, and I don't think I've read them more than once. I found The Beast and The Captive that are sequels to The Orphan. That's just incredible. I now have all three of these things. Fantastic. And then the last thing from this library book sale that I ended up going to the library, is, again, something that I've praised on this channel many, many times. I have copies. It is newer. So there are more copies available, and it's more readily available. It's the first book in a series, and I love it. It's by S.M. Stirling, and it's called Dies the Fire. And the premise is that everybody in the Pacific Northwest is going about their business when there's a blinding flash. May not even be light. It may just be neurological, because it's accompanied by a huge amount of pain. But the pain is over almost before you know to cry out. And when that flash is over, no technology works anymore. No higher technology works anymore. Planes fall out of the skies. Cars won't start. Gunpowder won't work. Electricity, no, none of that. None of it will work. And since gunpowder doesn't work, you strike some gunpowder on a rock and it flares just briefly and then stopped. Some of our characters start to think that someone has monkeyed with physics. This isn't just an EMP. But whatever the reason is, suddenly everybody in the Willamette Valley is forced to live on medieval terms. There are bicycles, you've got swords, lances, you can cobble together bows and arrows, you have to deal with resurgent wildlife, and you also have to deal with bad guys, with the people who decide, I'm going to take advantage of this to be lord of all I survey. And it's terrific. Absolutely terrific. It centers on three main characters, one bad, two good, and just follows them through their adventures. And half the fun of this book, of this whole series, is watching these characters build a new world. And you don't get that much in this first book. You get it in later books. The real fascination here is just in them figuring out how to survive in a world where there's no more food chain, no more supply chain, no more nothing like that. How do you even survive? Who has the basic skills that you need to plant a garden, to plan agriculture, to set up shelter, the barest possible things? That's how this book starts off. That's how the series starts off. The assumption that's made by S.M. Stirling right from the beginning. He makes a lot of assumptions in the course of these books, quite a few of them. You just have to roll with that. In order to enjoy his storytelling, you just have to roll with his assumptions. And one of those is that cities, big cities, will become death zones instantly. So there's no sense even taking the story into cities, because everyone will be dead. It's only in the semi-rural areas that the story can happen. I remember reading this and thinking, I'm not 100% sure that's true. In fact, I think there might be better opportunities for long-term survival, pockets of survival in big cities than anywhere else. But like I say, dealing with his assumptions is the price you pay for enjoying his storytelling. And his storytelling is fantastic. Just fantastic. So I was happy to do it. Of course, you can guess what another one of my questions was, right? Because I think it's in the second or third book, the characters are walking up to a barn type structure in a snowstorm. They're hoping for maybe abandoned equipment that they can convert or use, or maybe a little shelter. They open the door and a bear flings itself out and starts attacking everybody. And that's like the third bear to appear in 4 books. You get plenty of that. And you can guess what my question was, is where are all the dogs? Where are all the dogs? They're scarcely mentioned. I am assuming, I have always been, for 20 years, I've been assuming that means S.M. Stirling is a cat person. and that hence he was duty-bound not to consider dogs. When did this come out? When did Dies the Fire come out? 2004. So another element that is distinctly missing here, the characters don't even talk about it, of course, is the internet. They don't know what they're missing. They literally don't know, because S.M. Stirling didn't. It wasn't, the internet wasn't a governing factor in all of our lives when this first book came out, and he just decided to keep it that way. And it goes on from there. These books progress, unlike a great many series. These books progress in jumps of chronological time. So by the time the series ends, you're dealing with the descendants of the people in this book. I just love it. I love the series. Can't recommend it strongly enough. You would absolutely love it. And that was it. That was my Boston Public Library book sale, which I wasn't going to go to, but I have to say I'm happy that I did. I'm happy, even though there's not a lot of new stuff here. I don't think I bought a single book. Did I? No, I didn't buy a single book today that I haven't already read. But I'm happy to have them as doubles and as fallbacks. I don't think I can do a Steve pyramid, though. We have Dies the Fire. We have the Pliesian Exile tetralogy. I have a couple of Kirk Mitchell's New Republic books. We have Thrice Upon a Time with its interesting cover. We have The Third Eagle with its interesting cover. We have another R.A. McAvoy, Damiano. We have more Julian May, Intervention, broken up into 2 books. We have all 3 of Robert Stallman's Captive books about a kind of werewolf. Oh, no, it's not going to happen. All right, well, you get the point. It was a full day. I filled a bag with stuff. So that was my trip to the Boston Public Library book sale. In 2 months, they'll have another. Maybe I'll have a different spiritual advisor by then, and who knows, I may skip it. But anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.